Hey everybody, it's Mitch, and welcome to my next video. Today we are going to be comparing Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and GURPS 4th edition. So we're going to talk about really all the differences between them, the history behind them, why you might play one or the other, all that good fun stuff. So let's get started. First off, my background is D&D 3.5, so let's just get that out of the way. So I'm going to have a little bit of a bias towards that one. That, of course, is, I believe, the first one that was created, at least of these three. So 3.5, it is a system that is created by Dungeons & Dragons, of course, by Wizards of the Coast. It's got deep, rich lore from, 3rd edition, 1st edition, 2nd edition. And of course, they've borrowed a certain amount from, Tolkien and stuff. Let's just be real. Yeah, that all got sorted out in court. Those were fun times, before my time, but I've heard about them. 3.5 has got that rich Dungeons and Dragons lore that Gary Gygax created. 5th edition also contains a lot of that same lore, since it is Dungeons and Dragons. So of course they did borrow a lot of the same lore from the earlier editions. I mean, that's just how it works. And then of course GURPS is kind of its own system. It was created. I think I forget who created it, but GURPS was created as a generic. Generic Universal Role-Playing System is what it stands for, and it really describes what it is. So D&D 3.5 and 5e are very similar in a lot of ways. They both use a D20 system. They're both going to use a square battle grid. They're both going to use a lot of the same mechanics, but there are some very big differences. Like prestige classes is a thing in Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, which is really big and important to the game, whereas 5e, they replaced that with alternate class features. So it's not even alternate class features, but they just have like paths. Every class has different paths that they can take. I think they all have like 3 different options or something like that. And that's basically 5e's alternative to prestige classing. Now, prestige classing, how it works in 3.5, is much, much, much more customizable than what they have in 5e. 5e, basically, you have a handful of options to pick from, and that's really it. You don't have a lot of customization over your character. There's really only so many things you can do. Whereas, sure, that's true with 3.5 as well, but that number is absolutely massive, how many things you can do in 3.5. The sheer degree of control you have over your character is insane, and that's really cool, at least from the mechanics perspective. From a role play perspective, you have plenty of control in either system, and this includes GURPS as well, but right now we're just sticking more to 3.5 and 5e because they're so similar in a lot of ways. Now, 5e is more or less just dumbed down 3.5. They took a lot of the stuff in 3.5 and they simplified it, which made it easier to play for sure. But it also, like I say, gives you a lot less customization and control over how you want your character to be. So there's some trade-offs on that. Personally, I prefer 3.5. That's what I started with. And it's also, I just really like the amount of control. I don't like having to have my character dumbed down like that with 5e. But 5e is great for newer players. 3.5 can be very intimidating. There's a lot to it, especially if you start getting involved with the heavy optimization guys, because holy crap, that will intimidate almost anybody if you start talking to those guys. Those guys are great. I talk to them all the time, but new players, not the new players are a lot of new players are going to struggle. They are like friendly and like they'll talk to new players just fine, but yeah, a lot of new players will get very overwhelmed trying to deal with the min-max crowd, which I don't get me wrong, they're great. I love that crowd. But yeah, in fact, I'm sure some of those guys are watching right now. But yeah, so that's really the difference between 3.5 and 5e. 5e is much more new player friendly, or noob friendly, if you want to say that. I mean, let's be real. Everyone's a noob when they start. I used to be a noob. That's just how it was. I'm not anymore, but I used to be when I first started back in like mid 2000s. Um, but yeah, 3.5, it's certainly a very involved game. Whereas 5e, it's less, so you can focus more on the role play aspects. Now, both of these, however, are going to be focused heavily on, medieval fantasy. Whereas GURPS, I know we haven't talked about that in a minute, GURPS is very different. GURPS, it has a lot of that same customization that 3.5 does. In fact, to some extent, it's actually more, because it doesn't use a level-based customization like you see in Dungeons and Dragons, both 3.5 and 5e. Instead, it's a point-based one where you can buy abilities and skill points, or you basically you buy everything, like every little aspect of your character you buy for points, and the DM just awards so many points after each session, and they tell you how many to start with, and then you can use those points to do what you're going to do. So that's basically GURPS. It's very customizable, even to some extent more so than 3.5. Um, and it also works in lots of different settings. It can work in medieval fantasy, but it also works in literally any setting you can imagine, which is pretty cool. I actually really like GURPS a lot. Like 3.5 is my favorite. I'll say that now, but GURPS is, I'd say, easily my second favorite system out there. I really like GURPS a lot. So yeah, GURPS, it doesn't use a D20 system. It actually uses a 3D6 system. So basically with that, you roll 3D6, and you're going to try and roll low, because you want to roll lower than your score. Whereas with 3.5, you roll a D20 and you want to roll high because you add your score to your roll, and then you hope you beat some other arbitrary number out there to see if you succeed. So it's a little bit different of a system out there. And the D20 one, the number isn't arbitrary. It very much means something. It just can vary a lot depending on what you're trying to do. So yeah. But yeah, GURPS, it also uses a hex battle grid, where facing actually matters, which is something that is irrelevant in 3.5 and 5e. So GURPS will have that. Oh, and I'm talking mostly about GURPS 4th edition, just in case anyone was curious. But yes, so although I suspect the other versions are probably fairly similar, although I honestly have no idea. So yeah. Anyways, GURPS 4th edition has the hex battle grids with facings that very much matter. That takes a little bit of getting used to. I struggle with that myself. The combat turns are actually only 1 second versus 6 seconds in D&D 3.5 and 5e. So with that, combat moves a lot quicker. And you're able to see, like, during one turn, you're not able to do as much like you can with like 3.5 and 5e. You can do a lot during a turn. And initiative really matters a lot. Whereas with GURPS, it's less so, because how much you can do during a turn is limited, which is kind of nice. It makes combat a lot more realistic, because with 3.5 and 5e, it does sort of feel like everyone's just sort of standing around waiting for everyone else to take their turn, and then they get a go. That's not really what's happening. Everything's happening all at once, but it kind of feels that way because everybody gets to take their full 6 seconds before anyone else can do their full 6 seconds. Whereas with GURPS, they keep it to 1 second, which makes it a little bit more of a flow, and you can see more actions happening between actions, and it definitely seems more realistic because of that. Although it can be frustrating not getting your whole turn, especially seeing as a decent amount can be done during a turn. Anyways, yeah, so that's mostly talking about like the nuts and bolts of everything. GURPS doesn't have a whole lot of lore to it. I think that's somewhat by design, that They're trying to keep it generic and universal, so they want to just have no lore really in it, and let the DM or I guess GM with this do that. So we'll create the lore. That's another difference. Like Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to have a DM, a dungeon master, whereas with GURPS, you're going to have a GM, a game master. A little bit of a trivial deal, but that is a difference. DMs are pretty sure exclusive to Dungeons and Dragons. I think they may have actually coined like copyrighted the term Dungeon Master for their game. So like all other systems use Game Master, but it is what it is. It's not really a huge difference, but yeah. So they're the same thing. Let's be real. But yeah, so with GURPS, it's definitely an interesting one. It's basically just a system, and the GM can kind of do what they want and direct everything. So let's talk about to wrap this up how how this game actually plays out, like why you would play one version over another. So 3.5. So let's start with 5e. 5e is a great one to play if you're a new player and you want to play a medieval fantasy role-playing game. 5e is great for that. It's simple, it's basic. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of mechanics to get bogged down in. It's easy enough to learn. It's really great for new players that get intimidated easily. So it's not bad on that. That said, new players shouldn't necessarily just play 5e. Only the players that get intimidated easily by heavy mechanics. If you're a new player and you like heavy mechanics and you really enjoy seeing a nice heavy learning curve, then 3.5 might be the better option. Or if you're an experienced player and you want a large amount of control over your character, 3.5 is the better option because there is so much more control over that. Yeah, there's a lot more mechanics. There's a lot of learning. It's a heavy learning curve. I'll be the first to admit that, but there's a lot to it, and there's a lot to enjoy because of that. So much customization and optimization. If you enjoy that kind of stuff, you will enjoy 3.5 because 3.5 is all about customization and optimization. Or I guess that's not all it's about, but it is very good if you like that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's a great system for that type of player. Now, if you like that, but you're also want to play a different type of setting, or even if you're a beginner, because GURPS actually is pretty beginner friendly as well. The thing about GURPS is the mechanics are complex, but they're also simple. So you can play GURPS and know just the basic mechanics and do well enough. The thing about GURPS that makes it interesting is there are a lot of options, like combat options and various other things that you can do. You don't have to, though. So if you want to play a really simple beginner-friendly game, you don't need to know any of the complex stuff. And you can just start out just doing basic attacks and not doing anything fancy. And then as you progress and learn, you can start learning the new fancier things and figuring out how to do them and getting better because of that. Because the fancier stuff, gives you more options, and more options is better than less options. Let's be real. When you have more options, you can definitely use your turn more effectively, more often. Although even if you have a ton of options, you might still take the simple one. But anyways, yeah, GURPS, great for beginners, great for newer players. It's really, really, so it's great for learning the game. 3.5 can do the same. Like there's definitely some things with 3.5 that are not too complex as well. But yeah, GURPS, great for that. It's also great if you want to play something that's not a medieval fantasy game. If you want to play something kind of different, or maybe you want to like try and build like fictional characters into your world, like you want to play Iron Man or something, GURPS is the way to do that. There's other systems that are more designed for like superheroes, but GURPS can accommodate it just fine. I've actually tried building Iron Man; it works. There's all sorts of different things that can be done with it. So GURPS is if you want a something that's not so grounded in medieval fantasy, something that can be any sort of setting, that's when you want to play GURPS. Or if you just really like the hex battle grid, GURPS is pretty good too. And yeah, there's a lot of reasons to play GURPS. GURPS is a great game, not gonna lie. Anyways, that's really all I have to say about these systems. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I always love hearing from you. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like. Maybe subscribe to the channel. I mostly do D&D 3.5 content, but I do some of these every now and then. So if you like D&D 3.5, definitely subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss out on a video. Anyways, as always, I'm Mitch. I'll be seeing you.